Hello, hello, friends. It's your Chapo. It's me, Will, and sitting in is Amber, Felix, and Virgil. But joining us on the phone is Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, what's going on?
Not too much. Just hanging out, trying to stay out of a Brazilian jail, but otherwise things are pretty good.
Just a lazy Saturday downplaying foreign election interference.
Well, Glenn, we're going to get into what's going on in Brazil, and not just with the country in general, but also you specifically. But first things first. Wow. How about that Mueller testimony? I mean, I know if you're like me, you watched every second of that on the edge of your seat, and I could not believe the drama and just like the moments that created, like when he was asked a question and then said no or yes.
Glenn, how red is your face right now?
I mean, first of all, as somebody who's been a skeptic of this whole saga for a long time, I was obviously pretty ashamed given how dynamic and compelling his presentation was. And also, it also made me more excited about Joe Biden's candidacy because it made Joe Biden seem extremely robust and cognitively functional for the first time. So I thought that was also an interesting aspect to it.
Yeah, if Mueller wanted to, retain some of that Biden charm, he would have made a weird clicking sound with his mouth and turned to Barbara Mikulski isn't in office anymore, but someone and gone, "Oh, honey, beauty pageants down the hall." Just kidding. I enjoyed the Mueller testimony from an artistic perspective because it was like a more high-powered version of About Schmidt. That they're bringing in this fucking old man who, for every 2 months for the last 2 years, has been like, "Yeah, I can't arrest the president," and they're every 2 months they're like, "When are you going to arrest the president?" And he's like, "I can't." And he just keeps getting older and older and older as it happens. It's very, very tragic.
I thought it had a very Abramovich vibe.
It was really like the Wizard of Oz, exactly. Just for 3 years, it was like this gigantic superhero who was coming to save the nation, and then they opened up the curtain, and there was just this doddering, stuttering, old, weak, fragile man who could barely complete a sentence and had absolutely nothing of interest to say.
I actually thought it was more like the Nintendo product vehicle, the Wizard, because maybe we didn't win, but we went on a great journey and we sort of came of age.
Well, yeah. I mean, for years now, it's just we've been hearing, wait for the Mueller report. Then that came out, and it's just wait till he testifies, and now it's going to be wait till he testified and then said he can't do anything, but wait for us to do something. We're not sure what, but just keep waiting. It's gonna happen.
Again, though, very Abramovich. It's anticlimactic, and people stare into his face and start crying.
The prosecutor is present. All right. Well, I don't want to waste too much time talking again about that just absolutely firecracker performance. I mean, probably the most compelling thing on television since the moon landing, and it's appropriate because it was the 50th anniversary of that happening. So, but let's talk about Brazil, because this is a story that we haven't really paid attention to. Probably should have, because it is legitimately astonishing, and you were right at the center of all of this. So I was hoping you could help explain to us and our listeners broadly what's going on there. So let's start with, what was the car wash scandal, and who is Sergio Moro?
Right. So just before I answer that specifically, let me just say that, one of the interesting things about Brazil
They
is
speak Portuguese.
How geostrategically important it is in almost every aspect. I mean, just the size of it alone, it's the 5th most populous country in the world. It has gigantic oil reserves, and then it has the single most important environmental asset to protect against catastrophic climate scenarios, which is the Amazon, all of which are endangered. And so there's good reason to care about this country, and it's the 2nd biggest country in the hemisphere, beyond just the standard reasons to care about what's happening to a country of 220 million people. So the car wash investigation is actually something that is pretty interesting, because for a long time, Brazil has been driven by systematic corruption. So if you talk about corruption in the U.S., you usually mean one of two things. You either mean the illegal isolated kind, where some congressperson gets caught accepting a bribe, like an actual illegal bribe, not a legal bribe, but an illegal bribe? Or you mean the kind of legalized corruption, like lobbyists donate to PACs and donate to campaigns, and then the members of Congress write the laws that benefit them? In Brazil, corruption means like the illegal systemic kind. So just like every company that wants a contract from the government, a construction contract, an oil contract, knows that they have to factor in 8% or 6% into whatever they're paying, because that's the amount that they send in cash to a Swiss bank account that the politician in charge of that committee of the Senate or Congress has. And it's operated this way for decades, and everybody knows it. No one ever did anything about it. And what's interesting about Brazil is, it's a young democracy. It's now 35 years old, so it's not so young. So there's like a new generation of people who grew up actually being taught that things aren't supposed to work that way, that you're supposed to have like a constitution and a rule of law. And there's this group of, people in their 30s and early 40s who started taking that seriously and started investigating as prosecutors the kind of corruption that I just described that everybody knew and always accepted, and they decided it's not acceptable, and they started investigating and prosecuting and putting into prison like billionaires, things that you would never even see in the US, and really powerful politicians from multiple parties. And so for a long time, almost everybody, including me and people on the left and everybody in Brazil, thought it was a really positive, encouraging thing. They became kind of folk heroes. And then after a couple of years, people started noticing that they seemed much more interested in prosecuting left-wing politicians than right-wing politicians. And the judge who was overseeing all of these cases, so you had a kind of team of prosecutors called the car wash prosecutors, Lava Jato in Portuguese. There's this judge, Sergio Moro, and he was the one who was just convicting one after the next and giving them really harsh sentences. So they would like send billionaires to prison for 10 years or 12 years, or a lot of times they would imprison them without charges and kind of pressure and force them to accuse other people of crimes that were even more powerful or richer. And so people started raising questions like, wait a minute, is this really this kind of apolitical, non-ideological, anti-corruption crusade? Or is this a political operation by the kinds of people in Brazil who tend to be right-wing people who are highly educated outside of the US, who are on the right, to destroy Lula and the Workers' Party, which has dominated Brazilian politics for 20 years, using the pretext of law in order to destroy the right and put the left and put the right into power. And so, the big event culminated last year in 2018 when there was a presidential election, and all polls showed that Lula, who was the Brazilian president from 2002 until 2010 and left office with an 87% approval rating. So there's almost no figure as gigantic on the world stage as Lula, and he got term limited out of office in 2010. He was planning on running in 2018. All polls showed that he was easily going to win. He was leading by 20 to 25 points against everyone, including Bolsonaro. Suddenly, they charged him with a crime that even his critics thought was very dubious. It was a very simple case, so it allowed them to bring the charges and prosecute him very quickly. And then Judge Moro found him guilty very fast with very little evidence. And an appellate court who is very allied with Judge Moro quickly, within a matter of weeks, affirmed the appeal, which meant that under Brazilian law, once you're convicted of a crime and then you have that conviction affirmed, you're automatically barred from running for office. So that removed him from the presidential race. And then once he was removed, Bolsonaro became the poll leader, ended up winning the 2018 election. This very, very far right figure, way beyond like Trump or Nigel Farage or Marine Le Pen. Even Marine Le Pen has said, he's offensive and xenophobic, and that gives you a sense of like how far off the spectrum he is. So once he won, he turned around, and the first thing that he did was he created a new position that's called a super justice minister. and offered that position to Sergio Moro, the same person who removed his primary adversary, Lula, from the race. And so Sergio Moro, who was the judge overseeing this corruption investigation, has now been rewarded by becoming really the most powerful person in Brazil. You could call him the second most powerful person if you want after Bolsonaro. But all of these powers of surveillance and law enforcement and investigation have all been consolidated under his control. And he is now Bolsonaro's Minister of Justice and Public Safety, and obviously the most important person after Bolsonaro in Brazil. And the fact that he got that position after removing Bolsonaro's main obstacle to the presidency raised a lot of questions, even among people who had long supported this investigation in Sergio Moro.
But like also like by way of just a little background here, you mentioned that Brazil is a fairly new democracy, only 35 years old. Prior to that, it was under a military dictatorship for something like 25 years, right?
Yeah, so I think that context is crucial. So, you know, unlike like a lot of times people compare Bolsonaro to like some of these new right leaders like Trump or Marine Le Pen or what's happening in Italy and Spain. The big difference is that those countries have been democracies for decades or centuries. Brazil, in 1964, had a kind of center-left, left-wing government, which was overthrown by a military coup backed by the CIA, kind of like the classic, you know, CIA coup that they did during the Cold War all the time, and installed a military regime that ruled Brazil brutally from 1964 until 1985, murdered journalists, murdered dissidents. Bolsonaro was part of that military regime. I mean, he was a young, corporal and then a major, but he has spent the last 30 years saying that he believes Brazil was much better off under military rule than under democracy. He's an explicit proponent of returning to military dictatorship. So I think that is crucial to note, is that half the population in Brazil has lived under military rule before, and it's easy to persuade them that, you know what, things weren't actually that bad back then. With a lot of time, people forget the abuses, and he's somebody who affirmatively advocates military rule, and therefore the institutions in Brazil that protect democracy, unlike, say, in the US that have developed over 250 years, the population inculcated with a lot of values about democracy. Things are much more fragile in that regard when it comes to Brazil than almost any other major country that is now governed by a far-right leader.
So then, Glenn, who is Bolsonaro's base?
Well, so it is interesting in this regard. I actually do think there's an interesting comparison between him and Trump. So part of Bolsonaro's base is just outright, irredeemable fascists, like deplorables, I guess, for want of a better term. Just people who are devoid of any kind of ethical or moral sense. They're absolute racists. They tend to be like the upper middle class bourgeoisie, like the professional class, white. For sure, that's his base. Like the hardcore ideologues who think that like the problems in Brazil stem from black criminals who live in the favelas who should just be indiscriminately murdered, who think that homosexuals are pedophiles. Like that anti-LGBT animus is a big, big part of the Bolsonaro movement, unlike the other new right movements. So that gets him to maybe like 15 or 20%. Brazil is a white minority country. The majority of people in Brazil are non-white. Also, Brazil has huge wealth inequality. So even if you want to use like a really broad definition of rich, maybe 6 or 7 or 8% of the country could fall under that. So if all you were attracting were like the fascist and the racist and like the rich white assholes, you would get to like 8 to 10 to 12, maybe 15%, which is where everybody thought Bolsonaro was going to end up. Instead, he ended up in the first round of voting with 42% of the vote. And then in the second round against the Workers' Party with 55% of the vote. So a lot of the people who voted for him didn't vote for him because of his fascism or his admiration for repression or his homophobia, racism, misogyny. They voted for him despite that. They voted for him because the political class in Brazil has been neoliberal for the last 20 years. Even though the Workers' Party was supposed to be a left-wing party, it was very much like the Democratic Party. It caused huge amounts of suffering, a big epidemic of violence, income inequality got worse, And people were just desperate. Like, we know a lot of people in our lives, friends who are gay or who are black or who are working class, who voted for Bolsonaro because they hate the political establishment so much that the more the political establishment warned them about how dangerous Bolsonaro was, the more attracted they became to him. Exactly like 20 to 25 or 30% of Trump supporters are irredeemable racists. And then a lot of them are just people who are desperate and decided that they wanted the person who was going to promise to burn down the system that has been so brutal to them.
Just like, one other thread to pick up here before we get into like what you and the Intercept uncovered about the car wash investigation is the person who came after Lula, Dilma Rousseff, also in the Workers' Party, correct?
Yes.
She was impeached in 2016 as part of this investigation as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, more or less. I mean, and that's really when I started getting heavily involved in doing journalism in Brazil. I mean, I've lived here, since 2005, and except during the Snowden reporting, when I did a lot of reporting in Brazil because Brazil was a big NSA target, I kind of stayed out of Brazilian politics until the impeachment debate, because that was really the first time when it became clear to me that these forces that have tried forever to beat the Workers' Party at the polls and have failed made a decision that they were going to abandon democracy and just to take the Workers' Party out of power and put in a right-wing party that they've always wanted, to do really harsh austerity measures, to privatize the oil industry, and to sell off the Amazon. And that was the impeachment of Dilma. I mean, she was definitely not a successful president. She made a lot of mistakes. She was incredibly unpopular. But they found this like very technical kind of law breaking that she did, where she basically like borrowed money for longer than the law permits. And you had this band of like total criminals, people with like $50 million in Swiss bank accounts leading the impeachment against her, saying, we can't tolerate the kind of law break. It would be like if you had Charles Manson demanding that a president be impeached because of jaywalking, or like, I don't know, like...
Or recording a bad record with the Beach Boys.
Yeah, or like demanding Donald Trump be impeached because he made a joke about the Russians finding Hillary Clinton's emails in front of cameras in the scheme of all the crimes that he committed. It was just such an obvious pretext to get rid of her in an anti-democratic way, and there was almost no dissent allowed in the Brazilian media. That was when I first started writing about Brazilian politics, created the Intercept Brazil, basically to oppose impeachment, the impeachment of Dilma, because I knew that was the start of the unraveling of Brazilian democracy in the name of fighting corruption. And that's what actually did lead us to the point that we're at. I mean, I didn't anticipate how extreme it would all be, but I could see that was really the decision on the part of the establishment that they couldn't manipulate democracy the way they do in the US. And so they decided they were just going to abandon democratic pretexts and just start working outside of the framework of democracy.
And I mean, just like two other real quick things. The interesting thing about Dilma Rousseff is that she was actually tortured by the military dictatorship in Brazil. And I believe Bolsonaro has made comments to the effect of they didn't go far enough with her, basically. But also, like, just like broadly, like, how would you describe Lula Rousseff? Like, how would you describe the Workers' Party, like, to an American audience? Like how would you describe their base and their politics?
Yeah, so, I mean, Lula is just a fascinating political figure. He was born into, like, the most extreme poverty imaginable. He was one of 11 children. He was illiterate until the age of 10. He went to work in a factory and joined a union, and he lost a finger in the factory that he worked in, and he became a labor leader, like a really radical labor leader, and formed the Workers' Party as, a sort of left-wing political movement against the oligarchy that has always run Brazil and oppressed the Brazilian poor. The problem was that he was so left-wing that he ran for president 3 times and just was so destroyed reputationally by the media that's extremely dominant in Brazil that he came to the conclusion that he would never win the presidency unless he started assuaging and appeasing the banking class, the financial class, the family that owns the Globo TV networks. And so in 2002, when he ran for president for the fourth time, he wrote a famous letter called Letter to the Brazilian People, in which he renounced his radical past. He promised that he was going to work with, instead of go to war with, international finance and international markets. He chose as his vice president this kind of like banker figure, this, I don't know, maybe like Jeb Bush sort of figure, to, basically assuage the forces that had prevented him from winning, to at least not wage war against him. And that's what ultimately allowed him to finally win in 2002 and become president. And it's a really interesting story because for the next 8 years, the rich in Brazil got much, much richer. The market soared. So there was this kind of always this narrative that Lula loved of the Workers' Party against the elite, but the reality was the elite came to love Lula. At the same time, using these kind of corrupt, compromising political tactics, he was able to institute social programs that did actually take millions and millions of people out of poverty. So it wasn't any kind of revolutionary war against income inequality, but it actually tangibly improved people's lives in very meaningful ways. Like really innovative programs like this program called Bolsa Familia, which means that like if you have children and you prove that they're going to school every day, that they've gotten their vaccines, that they're getting medical care, you get, a certain amount of money each month that lets you live a decent life, to like have ownership of a house and like to get free college. So on the one hand, the actual dogmatic left in Brazil, including, for example, my husband's party. My husband's a member of Congress in a political party that used to be part of PT and left PT in protest of its neoliberalism. That left thinks that PT reinforced income inequality, entrenched the power structure. And while that's true, it's also true that Lula was so popular because he did actually help so many people, nonetheless, by preserving extreme levels of inequality. Dilma, who was his chosen successor, was even more badass and radical than he was. She was an actual Marxist armed guerrilla. Like, she took up arms against the military dictatorship. She, used weapons and terrorism against the military dictatorship. She was imprisoned and tortured, as you said. And when Bolsonaro voted on the floor of the Congress in favor of her impeachment, he specifically did so in the name of the colonel who actually tortured her. Like, not the colonel who oversaw the torture program, but the specific colonel who like put the electrical prods on her breast. Like, he said, in the name of the honorable colonel, whatever, I vote to impeach her. That's the kind of mentality that is now running this country.
So yeah, so we have a situation where Lula and Rousseff and the Workers' Party has essentially started out as a workers' party, but in order to achieve power, essentially made their peace with neoliberalism, but to do as much as they could do as far as like social welfare programs or whatever. And even though, like you said, the markets and inequality soared, for the Brazil's right wing and its oligarchy and let's say certain elements within the U.S. State Department or intelligence community, that is, of course, that's never going to be enough, right? Like, they're not going to be happy with just that. So let's now get into what you and the Intercept uncovered about this car wash investigation and this Mora, the judge who was the justice minister who was presiding over it.
Right. So Sergio Moro, over the last 5 years, has more or less been treated as like a deity in Brazilian politics. You like walk anywhere in Brazil and you'll see murals of his face on the side of buildings. Had he run for president, he almost certainly would have won. Even if Lula had won, that's how popular he became. He was always on the cover of magazines. They had like turned him into this almost like high priest of probity and ethics in a country that, in fairness to Brazilians who did that, were really desperate for just somebody that they could trust and believe in. And as a result, the media just never questioned anything that he did. They were completely supportive of it, in part because they really used the media. So they would get, some person that they had put into prison for 12 months with no trial, who was a multimillionaire or a billionaire in a Brazilian prison, who it was basically torture, willing to say anything. And they would say, yeah, I gave Lula $500,000 in cash in a suitcase, and then they would leak it to Globo, and then Globo would, spend a week with massive ratings doing no journalism, just getting these leaks. So the media and everybody loved Sergio Moro and this car wash investigation, at first for ideological reasons and then for kind of self-interested reasons. So there's been no transparency, no investigation at all of anything that they've done. No one could even question him. They were petrified of him because he was by far the most popular and beloved and revered figure in the country. There were things that he did that Supreme Court justices knew were illegal, but nonetheless approved because they were afraid of what the population would do if they impeded him in any way.
I mean, Glenn, he does, like, the way you're describing him and, like, as he's been received by the media and popular culture, I mean, he really does kind of sound like a Robert Mueller figure, except someone who actually, like, got results, someone who got shit done.
Yeah, I mean, like, the difference between him and Mueller is that, like, unlike Mueller, who I think, as we just saw, is just kind of like old and, just tired and didn't really care about all the benefits. Like, Sergio Moro's 41. And so he saw the opportunity, and he knew that, like, bringing down Lula would be the huge cherry on his massive cake. And he's very ambitious and took full advantage. He flew around the world. He was part of, like, the Time 100 list. He went to the gala with his wife in a tuxedo and this, like, really expensive gown that I forget which designer lent her. He really reveled in this kind of, like, reverence and power in a way that, Mueller never really did. And because of that, he was really motivated to do what was demanded of him, which was to put Lula and the rest of the Workers' Party in prison. And he did that. So everything they did was never questioned by anyone. No one had the capability or the courage or the political capital to even scrutinize anything they were doing. There was starting to be a lot of questions raised, especially on the left, about what did start to seem like a pretty corrupt operation, but no one could prove anything. No one had any evidence for it until 3 months ago on Mother's Day, when I was minding my own business on a Sunday and was contacted by a source.
Not calling your mother, Glenn? Wow.
I had just spent 6 hours on the phone with my mother.
Now your story's changing.
Telling her how much I loved her and all the gratitude I had for everything she had done for me, and telling her about my life.
Well, you only call on Mother's Day?
Spending the day with my mother on the telephone, I got contacted by a source who said that he had in his possession all of the private communications, documents, emails, chats, audios, videos, photos of Sergio Moro, the head prosecutor of the car wash task force, whose name is Delton Dallagnaol, who also became a kind of mini celebrity, somebody who was really revered, as well as every member of the car wash task force. And he told me that he's only gone through a small part of the archive because the archive is years of their communications internally, as well as all their documents, and has found immense amounts of corruption, and said, I want to give this to you so that you can reveal just how corrupt Sergio Moro and this car wash investigation actually is. And I said, yeah, okay, that sounds good. I'm happy to take that. I have some practice receiving things of that nature. And he began sending me the archive, and it took about 6 full days. And after 6 full days of sending it, maybe 10% of it was delivered. We then set up a more sophisticated means of delivery that allowed him to deliver it all at once. And then with the team of young journalists that we've built here in Brazil, like all in their 20s and 30s, we began looking through the archive, and what we found was, genuinely shocking. Like I, as a skeptic of Sergio Moro, was shocked by the stuff I found. It reminded me of how I always thought the NSA was spying on everybody, but was shocked by the extent to which they were doing it when I began reading the Snowden archive. We started seeing the two things that we saw right away that, you know, became kind of the two most important beginning parts of the story was, number one, the entire time that Sergio Moro was pretending to be the neutral judge presiding over these criminal charges. Just like in the US, a judge is required to maintain neutrality between the two sides. He was secretly plotting with the prosecutors every day, telling them how to construct the case, yelling at them about evidence that they should be getting and using, telling them that certain witnesses were weak and shouldn't be used. He was really commanding the exact prosecutorial case that he was then walking into court wearing his robe, pompously pretending to judge neutrally. And he did that particularly in the case of Lula. Like, he was the chief prosecutor to the point where he would even direct them, tomorrow you need to issue a press release rebutting what the defense said. So that was one part of it, was just how unethically, really criminally, he crossed the line of participating in the prosecution that he was pretending to judge. And then the second part of it was, we just found not dozens, but hundreds of examples where they would openly talk about the fact that the things that they were doing were explicitly designed to make sure that the Workers' Party lost the election in 2018. So, of course, all along, people would say to them, hey, it seems like you're more interested in prosecuting the Workers' Party than people on the right. And they would always say, that's outrageous. We're prosecutors. We don't have political ideologies. We don't have party preferences. But amongst themselves, in secret, they were constantly saying, oh my God, we can't let this happen. If we let this happen, PT is going to win the election. So that was just the beginning part of what we were able to reveal. But even that, just those initial set of stories in the first week, caused almost every major media outlet in Brazil that had spent 5 years applauding and revering him to editorialize that this showed grave corruption and required him to be fired or be removed from his position as justice minister.
So, I mean, essentially what you have here is this, Elliot Ness figure who's, supposedly about just the facts and, following them wherever they go, is behind the scenes basically working for the prosecution in this case, telling them, hey, why don't you bring this up? Why don't you say this? Like scripting how this court investigation should go. And the net effect of that is, I don't think it's too strong to say, as you described, that Lula would have absolutely beaten Bolsonaro in that election, what amounts to basically a coup by the far right in Brazil.
Exactly. And I mean, Sergio Moro's wife, and, you can decide to what extent you think this is relevant, who's a lawyer, was an explicit Bolsonaro supporter. So she was, on Instagram and Facebook every day, openly supporting Bolsonaro. In the private chats, there were all kinds of things we found where Sergio Moro was saying all sorts of things about the urgency of convicting Lula in time for the effect on the election to be valid. And then, of course, soon as even before Bolsonaro won, there was already conversations that Sergio Moro was having about which position he thought he was going to get or wanted in the new Bolsonaro government. He was choosing between being appointed to the Supreme Court or becoming justice minister. So, yeah, I mean, you can absolutely describe it as a judicial coup. In fact, I don't see how you could describe it as anything other than that.
Okay, Glenn. So, as this goes on, you were obviously famously associated with the Snowden NSA leaks, which became, one of the biggest stories, certainly in my lifetime in America. And, as a journalist, it's you never want to become part of the story. But I remember at the height of the Snowden NSA leaks, you sort of became the face of that story in a lot of ways. And, were sort of I don't know, it was about refuting Glenn Greenwald rather than Edward Snowden. But, let's be honest, that was just basically some shitheads who wrote for The Guardian or Atlantic coming after you. This story, I would say, is as big to Brazil, if not the world, as the NSA leaks were. But what's happened with you now being sort of associated with this story, quite a bit more serious than, like I said, an angry Jamie Kirchick missive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's a much more dangerous story for a lot of reasons. I mean, like during the Snowden story, stuff happened like, you guys probably remember, like the UK detained my husband under terrorism law and threatened to imprison him, but then they released him after 12 hours. They invaded the Guardian's newsroom and stupidly forced them to like destroy the archive, even knowing that it was saved in multiple other places, including in Brazil. And the U.S. government occasionally threatened me that, like, if I came back to the U.S., I would be arrested. And then there was that famous David Gregory, question when I went on the Meet the Press about why shouldn't I be in prison. But pretty much the entire U.S. media, he was like, hey, Mr. Greenwald, just wondering, like, why shouldn't you also be in prison? I'm like, because I'm like a journalist. The two big differences between what I'm doing now and what happened then, one is that I was doing that reporting from Brazil, and the Brazilian government at the time viewed the reporting I was doing as very favorable, very valuable, because I was exposing in part how the NSA was spying on their population and on their institutions. And the bombs that were dropping and falling and the politicians who were angry about what we were doing were thousands of miles away. As opposed to right now, the bombs are falling very, very, very close to where I'm sitting. And the people who are the angriest about it are the people who are actually the ones in power in the country where I'm currently existing. So that's one thing that makes it a lot more dangerous. And the people who are in power are people who rode to power based on more or less a promise to rid the country of these democratic protections and these basic liberties and to restore order, even if it means shutting down newspapers and things like that. So they're very dangerous people who are in close proximity. The other part of it that makes it very different that you perceptively observed is that I have become the face of the story in a way that wasn't even the true in the Snowden story, in part because of two things. One is that until 2 days ago, when the police claimed that they arrested our source, for the last 8 weeks, there was no source. So the source is just invisible. So unlike in the Snowden story, where a lot of the hatred got directed towards Snowden, like the people who wanted to say there was a criminal involved usually accused Snowden of being the criminal, and I just got to be like, oh, I'm just the reporter who like got the information and I'm doing my job as a journalist and reporting it. In this case, I became the only face of the hack, of the leak. So I pretty much got depicted as not just the reporter, but almost like I was the hacker, like the person who had stolen the information. But even more so, it became the strategy of the Bolsonaro movement deliberately to personalize the story to me, even though we were working and we decided to work in partnership with the biggest newspaper in Brazil, which is Folha, with a right-wing magazine that turned against Sergio Moro Veja. Even when they would publish stories, the Bolsonaristas on purpose would always say Glenn Greenwald leaked more documents, because I'm such a good villain for them, because I'm, number one, a foreigner, even though I've lived here for 15 years. Number two, I'm gay in a country where anti-gay animus is skyrocketed through the roof. And number three, I'm married to a congressman who's a member of a left-wing socialist party. So I check off every good box for them in terms of being a villain, not just for like the hardcore right, but even for that like reasonable center. So they really did purposely make me the face of the story for strategic reasons, in a way that wasn't even quite true in the Snowden story.
To give people an idea of just how scary and serious this actually is, you mentioned your partner, David Miranda, is now in the Brazilian Congress as member of a socialist party. But the person, correct me, the person whose seat he filled, I think, was someone named Marielle Franco. Could you talk about her?
You hit on two separate things that were conflated. So, but both are important. So, Marielle Franco is this woman who was black. She came from one of Rio de Janeiro's most dangerous favelas, and was also a lesbian, married to a woman. So exactly the kind of person who never wields political power in Brazil. She was a single mother at 19. She ended up like going to college, getting a master's degree. She was just an extraordinary person. And in 2016, she ran for the Rio de Janeiro City Council and got this overwhelming vote. It was like all the black women in the favelas, like people who just don't vote, all came out and voted for her. And she shocked the political establishment because it was 51 people are elected. She was the 5th most voted for candidate. Usually it's done by corruption. They just buy votes and the corrupt parties get the most votes. Her vote was totally organic. No one had heard of her. She came out of nowhere. And at the same time, my husband ran for Rio de Janeiro City Council as part of the same party. And he also won. And he also is black and gay and was raised in one of Rio de Janeiro's worst favelas. So the two of them sat next to each other in the city council, became best friends. And in March of 2018, she went to an event that was publicly advertised called Black Women Changing Political Structures. And on the way out of leaving the event, she was in her car being driven home by her driver, and a very professional team of assassins pulled up next to her car and pumped 4 bullets into her head and killed her instantly, and also 3 bullets into the back of her driver, who also was murdered. So that was only 500 days ago, March 14th of 2018. It was incredibly traumatizing for us. She was one of our best friends. Her wife is our best friend. So that already created a climate that was pretty terrorizing, that they could just murder someone like her who had such a high profile, who was so important to so many people. They did finally arrest, after a year, the 2 people who actually pulled the triggers, both of whom, unsurprisingly, were members of the police force and the military, but they still haven't found the people who paid them to kill her, who wanted her murdered. The other incident that you were talking about is that my husband, after being elected to the city council, ran in 2018 for Congress. And the way it's done is each party gets a certain number of seats. His party got 4 seats, and he came in 5th. So we thought they were going to get 5 seats, but because of the right-wing wave, they only got 4, so he became the first alternate. The member of Congress who was in his party, who was the only openly gay member of Congress ever in Brazilian history, is named Jean Willis. And he was actually bullied in Congress. Like, they would have generals in Congress and like right-wing members of the Congress who would pass by him in the hallway and like bump into him with their shoulder and then call him a faggot. He couldn't even use the bathrooms in the Congress because of how physically intimidated and bullied he was. He was getting so many death threats in the climate of Bolsonaro, especially because of how important anti-LGBT animus was. They were sending him pictures of the front of his house, pictures of the license plate of his mother, really severe death threats. So even though he was reelected, he decided he couldn't safely stay in Brazil, fled Brazil, went into exile in Europe. And so my husband automatically took his place as the next person in line on the party ticket. And so now my husband is the only openly gay man in Congress. So, obviously a lot of the hatred and threats that was previously directed toward Marielle, who they murdered, and Jean, who fled, is now being directed toward my husband. And as you can imagine, that has only severely escalated ever since we began doing this reporting.
And, it can't be stressed enough that Bolsonaro and the people around him have long ties to Brazil's former military dictatorship. And now many of the, paramilitary and just military death squads that, are in Brazil and, like I said, assassinating politicians and others, or, people in the favelas whose names, we'll never fucking know, pretty much with impunity.
Yeah, exactly. Before we started doing our reporting, the big scandal was that it was discovered that Bolsonaro's son, who's now a senator, while he was a state representative, had in his cabinet the wife and the mother of the militia leader who the police have said was responsible for Marielle's murder. So he's now a fugitive, but his wife and mother spent 10 years working in Bolsonaro's son's cabinet, obviously not working, but receiving a salary. they have all kinds of connections to these paramilitary gangs that have terrorized and ruled Brazil through violence, who assassinate people with great regularity. And it's ironic that we're actually talking today because I've spent the last, 6 weeks being threatened by multiple high officials, including Sergio Moro, with prison. Today, Bolsonaro himself gave a speech in Rio de Janeiro, and afterwards he was asked about this weird thing that Sergio Moro did, which was 2 days ago, just like randomly and out of the blue, he posted onto the website of the Justice Ministry this decree that said that he has the power to summarily deport or expel from Brazil any foreign citizen who is posing a threat to Brazil's national security. It was like this really passive aggressive and obvious threat toward me. Like, hey, I'm just randomly going to like remind you of this power that I have to expel foreigners from Brazil. But as it turned out, under this law, you can't actually be expelled or deported as a foreigner under any law if either you're married to a Brazilian citizen or you have Brazilian children, both of which is true for me. I'm married to a Brazilian, and we adopted 2 Brazilian children in 2017. So they asked Bolsonaro today, what is that thing that Sergio Moro did? Like, wasn't that an obvious threat toward Glenn Greenwald? And Bolsonaro said, no, Glenn Greenwald and his husband are frauds. They decided to marry another man in order to avoid the ability for us to deport them, and then adopted 2 boys.
Wow, that would be very deep cover.
Not only would it be deep cover, but it would be incredibly prescient of me because I married David in 2005 when I was still a lawyer and not even a journalist. So that would be incredible powers of being able to see the future, that one day I would be a journalist reporting on high-level corruption on the part of a fascist regime and needing cover and protection from being deported. And, as much as I love my children, as anyone with children knows, you don't fucking adopt 2 children because you want a little bit of an advantage under a law because it's fucking miserable half the time. So, so he said, you don't need to worry. He said in his speech, Glenn Greenwald doesn't need to worry, and none of you worried about him need to worry. We're not going to deport him, and we're not going to expel him. He's not going to be in jail in any other country, but there's a good chance he's going to be spending some time behind bars here in Brazil.
Glenn,
so that was the speech that he gave today.
Glenn, receiving all these threats and insults from the president, is it fair to say you're the Bruce and Nellie Orr of Brazil?
I can live with that. I can accept that.
Can we, I know that this is a heated discussion, but can we not talk about the despicable, awful Nellie Orr?
All right. Well, Glenn, we got to let you go, but I would say, again, please, everyone, check out your reporting on what's going on right now in Brazil that you've done for the Intercept. Like I said, it is a story of, it is of equal import to the Snowden NSA leaks, in my opinion, when you consider, as you said, that Brazil is the world's 5th largest country, one of the largest democracies in the world, that now, basically has undergone now a transition into a right-wing fascist dictatorship, or is quickly sliding down that road. And as well, and you mentioned in the beginning, the rainforest, again, the Brazilian oligarchs and the people who back Bolsonaro are, part of, a lot of them are from the sort of ranching class in Brazil, which is stripping the rainforest bare at the moment. I mean, much of it is already gone, but just for some perspective, the Amazon rainforest provides approximately 1/4 of all of the oxygen that you breathe on Earth. So if you'd like to continue breathing air on this planet, it's of, I would say, huge importance what's going on in Brazil right now.
The Amazon also provides 80% of our natural cures.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I'm super grateful that you guys took the time to talk about this. And I'm also glad, I'm pretty confident that we didn't repeat Virgil's mistake from the last time of my not recording my end because he neglected to tell me that I was supposed to. I'm pretty sure.
Well, that wasn't my mistake.
This time. So, hopefully Virgil's mistake has not been
That
repeated.
wasn't my mistake.
Virgil is
Virgil's
going to be
mistake.
deported from the trap house.
Yep.
But no, Glenn, seriously, to you and David and your children and friends and family and also your many dogs, sincerely, please stay safe, and please keep doing what you're doing.
More lies from the phony
Thank you, Will.
journalists.
Really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Really great talking to you as always.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.
Thanks. Take care.
I'm seeing a lot of griefing and general asshattery in this Gary's Mod server. I will not hesitate to call law enforcement. I do not think that the webmaster would like to be disturbed from his special time with his Wi-Fi to deal with the utter gobshitery in this server right now. If I see people griefing other people's creations in Gmod, IPs will be recorded and they will sit in a notepad in my very special folder on my desktop. Do you understand me?
Felix's new character, the Angry Webmaster.
Oh, no, he's not even the webmaster. He just brags about knowing the webmaster.
Okay. Reference fail.
Reference fail. The webmaster will be quite tickled to hear about this.
All right. Well, thanks again to Glenn Greenwald. That was some heavy shit. So let's have some fun. I got two items here for you guys for the rest of the show. And what do you know, it? Matt's in the house. We got a full deck. All
That's right,
Chapos
folks.
on
We're all
deck.
here. We're all trying to step through the same doorway at the same time, like the Stooges.
A wealthy dowager has hired all of us to renovate her apartment, and things are not going quite as planned.
Fellas, don't you hate it when you see just a perfect 10 out of 10 flapper and you drop a safe on your friend's foot?
All right, so the first item that I want to bring up is another one of these stories that I basically think we have willed into being through our lathe of heaven-like abilities that have been granted to us by this podcast. This is a story that I swear to God we would have done as a joke maybe 3 or 4 months ago, but wouldn't you know it, it's all real. I'm talking, of course, about Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plan to build Jurassic Park in the middle of the Arabian desert. You heard that correctly. He is going to build Jurassic Park in the most barren part of the most barren country in the world. I'm talking about a fantastic futuristic city called Neom. Yes, the name of that city again, Neom.
When you
How's it
bar
spelled?
a space ballion.
It's like neon, but with an M at the end.
Okay, that is a brand of yoga pants.
You know how like sort of deranged Victorian rich people would like reenact, just get obsessed with the fall of the Roman Empire. The Saudis they want to make dinosaurs to make them go extinct in a climate catastrophe again. I mean, like everyone's always, we always talk about like Texas and Southern California just being like, in the
Mike
in
that
Florida,
cat up.
in the immediate just being in the crosshairs of climate catastrophe. But there are a few places that are more fucked than Saudi Arabia in the next 30, 40 years.
Well, that's why they're building Neom.
Yeah.
It's an
Right. I'm the
basically,
asshole.
the city of Neom is like in SimCity 2000 when you built a city of just arcologies.
Well,
That's what they're going for.
I mean, everyone's always talking about
but with no water.
well, I mean, okay, let's think about this. Everyone's always talking about like banning straws or like cutting emissions, shit like that. No one's ever thought about fighting climate change by having a pterodactyl. No one's ever done the math here.
So I'm assuming this is just going to be a game preserve for them.
They hunt the deadliest game there.
Yeah.
And by that I mean dinosaurs.
I mean, it's gonna be hilarious when like a T-Rex somehow shoots down a Saudi F-22. I can't wait for that. It won't even be a T-Rex. It'll be a fucking Apatosaurus. It will be like a non-violent herbivore dinosaur.
Over it.
Just fucking necks the F-22, flings it into a volcano.
All right, so it says here, according to a report this week by the Wall Street Journal, consultants hired to work on the Neom project built a list of ridiculous recommendations, including a hologram facility in schools, cloud seeding induced artificial rain, a Jurassic Park-style island of robot reptiles, robot maids, robo-cage fight entertainment, and flying taxis. This is, of course, comes from the Wall Street Journal, obtained 2,300 pages of documents prepped by Boston consulting group McKinsey and Company.
They are,
Do you know it?
Shout out to all the scammers getting their bag. That is so. I love going to fucking Princeton, Harvard, and Yale so I could charge millions of dollars to tell just one of the dumbest fucking people alive. Like, yeah, what you need is expensive battle bots.
Yeah, it would be really difficult to like come up with something dumber than Westworld. But
So this is
it's what Saudis do.
fully automated luxury oil theocracy? Is that it?
I mean, first of all, I love that McKinsey is involved in this. They're just like gonna fleece this shithead for all that he's worth. I mean, they should be telling him to lay off 80% of the royal family like they do to other American firms. But
I mean, they should be telling them you should just go to a place that's going to not be uninhabitable in 20 years. But I mean, if you were really doing the full evil deed of advising just a family with possibly trillions of dollars of wealth, and it's just going to be no human life can be sustained there, that's what you would do. But they're about their bag.
Yeah, so they're like
rules.
They're like the engineers around Homer when he was designing that car. It's like, oh, bubble top. That sounds good. Yes.
So it says, according to the Journal, a source said NBS came up with the idea for Neom 4 years ago when he was mulling how to overhaul the economy and pulled up a map of his country on Google Earth and saw its northwest quadrant was a blank slate. The rest of the piece is just as unflattering. In addition to plans for a giant artificial moon developed in partnership with NASA, the aforementioned robot maids and dinosaurs, and a project to modify the human genome to make people stronger, the Journal wrote that the prince wants a beach that glows in the dark like the face of a watch.
Ah.
The moon might be made of fleets of drones, but engineers have no idea how to create the glow-in-the-dark beach.
Uranium, dumbass.
Yeah. I could figure that out. Give me unlimited resources. I'll give you a glowing beach.
I like how just in the middle of there, it's alter the human genome to make people stronger.
Why do they need to be strong? The robots are doing everything. They should become weak little, they should just be brains in jars. Why do they need bodies at all?
Well, have you ever tried to take a robot maid's passport? They're pretty strong.
It says here, NBS also reportedly became frustrated when advised to develop a road plan for the city, the Journal wrote. A person who reviewed the minutes of the meeting between the prince and a deputy for former Arconic Incorporated CEO Klaus Kleinfeld, who was brought in to plan a mega bridge between Neom and Egypt across the Red Sea, has since left the project amid ballooning cost estimates of $125 billion. Said the prince responded by saying, I don't want any roads or pavements. We are going to have flying cars in 2030.
Hey, fuck it, man.
Weren't we supposed to have flying cars now?
Yeah.
I don't think we're getting the flying cars, man. I think we got to give up the ghost on that one.
Also, I think it's just one of those things that sounds good in theory, but once you have a third dimension,
Yeah,
to
you
move in,
cannot
it's a
control
complete
for
fucking mess.
traffic. They're just going to smash into each other.
No, there would have to be roads still. There would be the same basic
They would just
road
be
structure.
slightly above the
Yeah,
ground, which is
exactly.
not cool.
Yeah.
If you've ever read John Dolan talking about any time he spent in Saudi Arabia, I think they still got to figure out the road thing before they get to the flying car thing.
Yeah, imagine the terror of getting in a car accident, but added to that, immediately dropping 10,000 feet, plummeting to the earth after a mild fender bender.
I hate it when I'm going for a cruise in the Saudi Arabia Sky Highway and I accidentally hit a family's pet falcon.
It would be very funny, though, if they had literal flying cars and women still weren't allowed to drive them.
Well, I love the idea, the fact that he just says, where we're going, we don't need roads. By the way, the flying cars will still run on gasoline. That's the most
That's
important,
the important thing. None of this works if we get off the gas.
I know I said a bunch of them already, but I just want to go through the list here of things in the Wall Street Journal that were the details about what's going to be in, Blade Runner 2049. Okay, flying taxis.
Awesome.
Driving is just for fun, no longer for transportation. E.g., a Ferrari next to the coast with a nice view, the planning documents show. Number 2, cloud seating. The desert always won't...
Is that a real thing?
Well,
I keep hearing about that.
It says here
No, it's real.
cloud seating.
How do you do it, though? What, you jack off in the cloud? What is this?
Well, from your flying car.
We're better at preventing rain. The Chinese did that during the Olympics.
Yeah, how do you make it rain?
They do the opposite.
But there's no precipitation at
No.
all.
What they do is they suck up the clouds if you want to get
the
rid of the
science
rain.
behind weather modification is theoretically possible, but my understanding is that we're quite bad at it. We don't know really how to do it, to make it. It's very difficult to make it rain.
Yeah.
Unless
Unless you're at the club, am I right?
You detonate a very small tactical nuclear warhead in the upper atmosphere.
Well, the test for this is going to be the fucking World Cup in Qatar, where they said because it's 140 degrees and they're trying to have them play outdoor soccer.
Outdoor summer
And
soccer.
And the premise is that they were going to have some sort of giant floating clouds to block the sun. That was their pitch anyway, while they were just handing giant suitcases of money to FIFA.
I
But
thought they were building domes.
I don't think
That's the only way you can do it.
No, they were not saying domes. I mean, they're killing like thousands of people building these things, but I don't think they can be. They're not going to be domes.
So cloud seeding, the desert won't always feel like the desert. Cloud seeding could make it rain. So again, this is how they're going to factor. They're going to deal with building, like a giant futuristic arcology in the middle of the most uninhabitable corner of the planet Earth.
I mean, even if this was successful, though, like the desert is the desert because it's the desert. When the desert pours, there are like mudslides. Has this person never seen David Attenborough?
And also, it's going to be 140 degrees there soon. What about that? Is it under a dome? What's the plan?
It's got to have a dome.
No,
Quit
there's
saying
no
dome.
There is no dome in this fucking McKinsey
Well, how do you
document.
do it? It's just like I get air conditioning. It's just pneumatic tubes between the buildings, and you never actually go outside.
Okay.
Is this a giant mall?
We've I mentioned this before, but robot maids. Don't worry about household chores. While scientists are at work, their homes would be cleaned by robot maids.
But
So
then
just-
who do I get? Who can I abuse? This is pointless. This sucks.
Also, like I think we've kind of like made one of the huge advancements for women has been that like just housing is more clean now. Like the entire house doesn't fill up with like soot from the fireplace, and things are made of cleanable surfaces, and things don't really get that dirty unless you're Will.
Come on, Felix is sitting right here, Amber. Why are you looking at me?
There is no way Felix's place is worse than yours at this point.
Well, I'm moving. Come on. Edit this out, Chris.
Just gonna leave it.
Will has like 17 boxes of Korean eel masks in his place.
They're not Catherine's either.
So basically, yeah, they want to do the Jetsons and the Flintstones at the same time.
Yeah.
Because if they make robotic
Yes.
dinosaurs, they're going to be using them for construction purposes.
Yeah, you gotta slide
Right.
down the back. It's gonna be
It
good.
is a living.
State-of-the-art medical facilities. Scientists would work on a project to modify the human genome to make people stronger. Okay, yeah.
I feel like
Next.
I feel like I did a monkey's paw thing where like Metal Gear Solid's becoming real, but the Saudis are doing it. Like genome alteration, they're gonna make mechs. They're probably gonna make a super soldier, but it's just these assholes. This sucks, man.
But also world-class restaurants. There would be fine dining galore in a city with the highest rate of Michelin-starred restaurants per inhabitant. So it's like going to be 1-to-1 Michelin star to people.
Everybody gets a Michelin chef. to
Wait,
just
hang
feed
on.
them.
Is
No,
this-
they should do one less than the people there, so it's like musical chairs, and someone always gets left out of dinner.
Yeah,
Wait, I
one
don't
guy,
understand.
somebody's got to
Is-
make ramen every
Is
night.
this a theme park or a place people live?
No, the idea I've read about this. The idea is it's supposed to bring all of the world's most brilliant scientists there to work. Is the idea? It would attract all of the most genius people. All the Nobel Prize people would all move here.
Oh, so it's
And
like
they do
it's like
all
one
their
of those libertarian Reddit projects
Yes.
where we're gonna buy an island and all the enlightened, intelligent,
yeah, it's
high
like-
IQ types will move there.
It's Gulch for serious.
No, this is Goon Island with unlimited resources.
which it would still fail.
Wait, Felix,
But there's gonna be a $30 billion zip line that just slices people in half.
zip line across the Red Sea into Egypt.
You just smash into the pyramid.
Yeah, they let like one of the guys out of the Hilton prison. I'll make the website.
Of course,
And it would be also be, and then people would visit. So that would be the thing. It would generate its own economy through knowledge bullshit, like the knowledge economy, and then it would also be a tourist attraction.
That is it's great because it's like if you're just like, you're some STEM professional, you have a PhD, you can really like you'd go anywhere. You live in like, fucking let's say like America or somewhere. And you're like, my wife kind of wants to move to the Bay Area, for the schools for the kids. I kind of want to stay like on the East Coast. But there's also this place that's 140 degrees run by a theocracy, but they have robotic dinosaurs, and they'll inject our kids with an enhanced genome, so they'll have 12 packs one day.
Can't wait to get my ass kicked by my 8-year-old kid who's got like CRISPR swollenness. He's just off that CRISPR.
I mean, but honestly, like at this point, like Saudi royals don't understand what is attractive to normal people.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
that's the
Like
thing.
that's what I think. They're like, we have dinosaurs.
if you
like,
wanted-
they have no idea.
If you wanted to a city where you attract all the intelligent people, all you have to do is say we're gonna remake the new Star Wars movies, and we're gonna do it right, and that would cost you like a few $100 million tops.
Yeah, I mean, like if they really wanted, the top intellects in the world, they would make a giant, like 500-foot tall Pickle Rick.
But in Saudi Arabia, you can't have depictions of Pickle Rick.
So we mentioned dinosaur robots. Residents could visit a Jurassic Park-style island of robot reptiles. Now, you say that this Saudi Arabia is like out of touch with what normal people want, on
Or even just
vacation.
nerds,
Not
or what
even
anyone
normal people.
wants.
It's
Like,
like-
they're out of touch with your average super genius.
I would visit Neom if it had an island of actually genetically engineered dinos.
But they're just fucking. That's just Epcot Center.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
they're
but-
fucking
Yeah.
robots,
But yeah,
it's like
exactly.
Chuck E. Cheese. Who gives a shit?
But if they made real dinosaurs, they wouldn't run on gasoline.
Chuck.
They would eventually become gasoline, though.
Yes.
So they should really plan for the future.
My Stegosaurus is rolling coal.
And a Patasaurus would be like a Prius owner. It's like there would be Saudi conservative comedians who'd be like, "Oh, nice coexist sticker on the back of your herbivore long neck dinosaur."
So, yeah.
Chucky Bin Cheese.
Glow in the dark sand. We've said they haven't mastered that yet. The super soldiers and robot dinosaurs, no problem. But glow in the dark sand, apparently that's stitching them up.
What about that algae that glows?
Oh, we're just
I think that'd be fine.
pour out like a zillion
Just use a
glow
bunch of glow
sticks.
sticks. Yeah. I have figured out that technology at a rave.
Oh my God, that's it. This is the world's biggest sober rave.
Well, Felix, you say that, but number 8 on the list is alcohol. Alcohol is banned in the rest of Saudi Arabia, but it likely won't be here.
Ooh.
So there
Well, you
go.
can't go into your Michelin
Well, it's
star
never
hotels,
been banned for them.
restaurants. Yeah, well, that's true. You can't have Michelin star restaurants without pairings, without wine pairings.
Robot martial arts. Robots would
Wait,
do
wait, wait,
what?
wait, wait, wait,
Yeah.
wait, wait. So
Are you fighting the robots or are they fighting
is,
each other?
is it like battle bots?
Yeah.
Or are they like mechs? Are
I think
you
they're more like
inside them?
anthropomorphized than battle bots.
Okay.
Is it Rock'em Sock'em robots? Do humans control them? Are they automated?
I might be into that. If,
Well,
if
which
we
version?
could, like the Rock'em Sock'em, like if you were
Like
on
real
one side of the
steel.
arena and I was on the other,
Yeah.
and we had robots that we control that would kill each. Like that sounds extremely
It
fun. to me.
wouldn't.
Did you see Real Steel with Hugh Jackman? Because that's basically the premise of that movie.
It wouldn't be martial arts because a robot couldn't create art.
They're going to pay Ohioans like thousands of dollars to sequence like their thought patterns and their genomes so they can create the perfect AI for an MMA fighter robot.
It says robots would do more than just clean your house. They could also spar head-to-head in a robo-cage fights, one of the many sports on offer.
Are they owned by a robot, Leonardo DiCaprio?
Are the dinosaurs going to fight? Because why would you have? I mean, I'd rather see dinosaurs fight than
Robot
stupid
dinosaurs?
human-looking robots.
I mean, Matt, if the city of Neom ever does come into existence, my guess is that there would be like all kinds of every imaginable blood sport possible would be
Yeah.
on offer and display.
good.
Okay, security. Cameras, drones, and facial recognition technology are planned to track everyone at all times.
Oh, fantastic.
Cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
And last but not least, the moon. A giant artificial moon would light up each night. One proposal suggests it could live stream images from outer space, acting as an iconic landmark.
Okay, but
This is
don't
like-
they already have the moon in Saudi Arabia? like the one? Do they just want one they don't have to share?
Yeah, that's going to screw up the tides.
Like,
Well, Amber, this is like, the fucking world we live in where everyone's like looking at their phones or just taking photos instead of just being in the moment. Why live stream the moon when you can just look up at the night sky?
no, my question: are they going to have a second moon?
Yes.
Will it be in orbit around Earth?
No,
Will it just
no,
be in
'cause
low
'cause then
atmosphere?
They're not giving us that moon for free.
Well, then what's
It's
it going
gonna
to
be
be? It's going to be.
small.
It's going to have to be propelled. Then it's going to have to be.
I know, yeah.
Because if you're not,
Well,
because
except
the
it's
moon stays
drones.
up there because
I
of
know.
it's
well, if they
in
have
orbit.
flying cars, I assume they'll use the same technology to levitate the false moon.
It's just got a giant exhaust pipe bellowing out.
Yes.
It's like a fucking got a smokestack.
It's just belching smoke
Jesus
downward.
Christ. You just hear the engine going brrr, like a fucking giant lawnmower to keep it just hovering above you.
I mean, like, we were just like fucking like Dubai is like already halfway to Neom, and like Virgil, you asked a good question. We brought this up originally.
Oh yeah.
Why the fuck do people go to Dubai? Like, what?
No, that wasn't my question. My question was, okay, so they built this like giant city that has all of this space, like all of these skyscrapers and shit. So are people in there, or do people live or work there? Because you look at pictures, and like 15 years ago, that was just desert. There was nothing there.
I don't think it's. I think it's luxury Potomkin. I think is.
Yeah, that's why. That's why
yeah.
thinking of it. Like maybe there's some tourists, and that's it.
There are tourists.
It's full of falcons.
There's tourists. There's a lot of expats who work in money laundering, basically. Also, people who are being trafficked for sex slavery and things like that. And then also, they're now an airport hub for traveling between.
But mostly those huge skyscrapers are empty.
I don't know.
They gotta be.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I mean,
Burj Khalifa
I really
is a
think
hotel.
that. Yeah, no,
I
I
don't
think
know what
he's
it's
right. I think they largely are. I think it's for show. I think also like the luxury value of the place is somewhat in the fact that it's so elite that you have none of the actual attributes of a city, which is the rabble walking around.
Right. I mean, it's like more. Just looking at pictures of it, it looks like more actual residential and commercial capacity than the entirety of Lower Manhattan. But if you walk down the street, it would be eerily empty.
I think it's a Potomkin luxury city. Yeah.
That's the thing is they're not going to do it because these Gulf states always say, oh, we're gonna build this great thing and the whole world's gonna see it, and then you get some shit like Dubai and it's like oh, here's some islands that look like the world, which you would like look at once and be like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, those islands are so fucking stupid.
You can play
Oh my
golf
God,
inside.
They look
Who gives a
awful,
shit?
and no one can possibly like go to that, right? That can't be.
Well, I mean, like the only way you could appreciate it is from height.
Right.
Like, if you're on the island, it's like,
You know what?
You're just like, this is an island shaped like Africa or something.
You know what?
Who gives a fuck?
It's literally not even as cool as one of those roadside stops where you can all stand in 4 different states at once.
Yeah, because they just bulldozed a bunch of fucking sand up and like murdered a million manatees.
Don't they have a
it.
giant like indoor ski mountain?
Yes, they have an
Yeah.
indoor
Like,
ski
how is
mountain.
that? There's 0% chance that is superior to any existing outdoor ski mountain.
Yeah, but soon it's going to be the only ski mountain.
Remember
So
when
they'll
we-
be able to get a lot more action.
Remember when we saw? Remember the place we went to CPAC in?
Yeah.
National Harbor, Maryland, baby.
Yeah, that awful mall city.
Yeah.
It's just going to be that. That's really it.
That's true.
It's
I mean-
very grim.
I mean, I'm just thinking, who's impressed by any of the shit in Dubai? It's like
Really
it's,
stupid.
It's
A
like
lot of really
that's
stupid
what it is.
people.
It's like when we went to the Mall of America, we were like, oh my god, there's an indoor roller coaster.
Okay,
There's a whole roller coaster.
Okay. Where else in the fucking world do you think you can go to a Tivana and then get on a roller coaster literally within fucking minutes? Do not compare it to this fucking monstrosity. Mall of America is great. It's one of the last communal spaces in America.
Mall of America is our Dubai.
No, absolutely
There's also an
not.
American.
They respect
there's
human
also
rights
an
at the Mall
American
of
military
America.
base there, Camp Snoopy.
All right. Well, that's another sovereign state that America is invading. We need to get them out of there. We need to get America out of Mall of America.
All right, so yeah, that is the city of Neom. An ecological disaster coming
old
soon.
Neom.
I mean, it's also sort of disturbing that they're like, how do we revamp our economy? Like, what? Selling oil to the entire planet isn't good enough anymore. I guess they're running out.
They are running out. No, they
I
absolutely
do
are.
like that like they are, oil barons, and then they're like, okay, but what if we were businessmen? And then they came up with a business idea that sounds like a 3rd grader came up
Well,
with.
it's an entire fucking, it's a 900 member ruling family of just Wyatt Cokes.
Yeah.
It's just rich dipshit kids. And like, what do America's rich dipshit kids do for work?
They start a fashion brand.
Exactly,
or they
for the
become
boardroom
an
of the
actor or
discotheque.
something.
Start a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. It's all horseshit. It's all like brain damaged idiocy, just like Neom.
It's like if a coke dealer got really into micromanaging his money laundering business.
Yeah.
Well, to put a cap on this, it's interesting how oil barons can become oil baron. Damn.
Jesus Christ.
What's up? What's the problem?
Okay, so moving on from Saudi Arabia to another country, talking about Great Britain, which just has a new prime minister. We talked about this while we were over there. It was going on. Come on, there was never any doubt.
The big, beefy,
It's the
cute
albino.
man.
It's the albino ape. Boris Johnson is now the prime minister of the UK.
Kind of sexy with it.
And I just like to say, like, as a way of prefacing this, if there is a general election and Jeremy Corbyn doesn't win, basically anything could happen to Great Britain, and I wouldn't care.
I'm already, having gone there, I mean, as long as they carve out the North and it gets to be like a different place, like, I don't care what you guys do.
Yeah, the
Whatever.
People's Republic of Manchester.
I don't know
Exactly.
why, but ever since
Exactly.
he got the big brass ring, I've been just thinking about his ass and what it looks like. And the thing I can keep thinking of is that it's like an aquarium filled with vanilla ice cream. And I don't know why I keep thinking about it, but I can't stop.
I
think it was because Quillette said that he's an Ubermensch.
Well, okay. Well, you already know where I'm going with this one.
I would love that swaggering Superman to take his ass, which is like a garbage bag filled with very heavy, wet sponges, and just use my tongue like a fucking car wash.
So I'm not anticipating where I'm going with this. While we were on the UK stretch of our tour, we probably wrung more material out of Toby Young than any of the other fucking absolute freaks in that awful island nation. Toby Young is back with a piece in Quillette that, I mean, I'm not even going to read all of it because it's fucking interminable, but it has some really choice nuggets. Writing in Quillette, Toby Young, cometh the hour, cometh the man.
They're both CUM, right?
A profile of Boris Johnson. And this does not disappoint. So let's just dive in here. I first set eyes on Boris Johnson in the autumn of 1983 when we went up to Oxford at the same time. I knew who he was since my uncle Christopher was an ex-boyfriend of his mother's, and he had told me to keep an eye out for him. But I still...
What? Is this a riddle? What the fuck?
Keep an eye out for this guy. I fucked his mom.
But I still wasn't prepared for the sight and sound of him at the dispatch box of the Oxford Union. This was the world-famous debating society where ambitious undergraduates honed their public speaking skills before embarking on careers in politics or journalism. And Boris was proposing the motion. With his huge mop of blonde hair, his tie askew, and his shirt escaping from his trousers, he looked like an overgrown schoolboy. Yet, with his imposing physical build, his thick neck, and his broad Germanic forehead, there was also something of Nietzsche's Übermensch about him.
Isn't he like 5'9"?
Have you met a person over 6 feet tall?
Not in England.
Yeah, that's very
British
tiny there.
people
I want to
are
meet Toby Young so that he just worships me like fucking Kurtz in the jungle. He's just a fat guy, for Christ's sake.
I want to imagine taking Toby Young to like Ohio versus Michigan football game.
Yeah.
He'll just be like, "Oh my God, this is Valhalla."
You know what?
Just
I'm
tons of
beginning
fat
to
guys
think.
in windbreakers and aviators. You should kill me, sir.
I'm starting to think that like we don't actually have a fan base for the podcast in the UK. People just showed up to look at us because they thought that we were the hottest people they've ever seen.
Oh God, they had nutrition when they were children.
I would reckon that the bones are not hollow.
I mean, you know, if you've ever seen a photo of Boris Johnson, I know you must have thought Nietzsche's Superman.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. But that's not enough. Listen to this. He goes,
Eche Chomo. Allegedly.
parody. So he goes on. He doesn't just describe his broad Germanic forehead and that he's like Nietzsche's Übermensch. He goes on with further imaginings about Boris Johnson. You could imagine him in lederhosen walking through the Black Forest. Yeah. DJ, run that back. DJ, run that back.
If Boris Johnson wore anything approaching shorts, the sound that his thighs would make as they hit each other, I think it would be like, you know how like when cheese curds are really fresh and they squeak?
Oh,
when you
yeah.
bite down?
Just that thigh meat bulging out of the leather pants.
You could imagine, coming down to get a glass of water at 3 a.m. and Boris Johnson just ass naked, his big baddie booty just waving in the glow of the refrigerator. What WID?
DJ, run that back. You could imagine him in lederhosen wandering through the Black Forest with an axe over his shoulder looking for ogres to kill.
I don't think there were historically ogres. I mean, this guy was in charge of education. It's pretty fucking stupid.
I mean, in the UK there are grotesque hunchbacks who do eat the bones of children, but they're just, we're in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet in the 80s. This same combination, a state of advanced dishevelment and a sense of coiled strength, of an almost tangible will to power, was even more pronounced in his way of speaking. Folks, we got some coiled potency.
These guys they're all coiled. They love looking
I would not be surprised if his dick were coiled like a pig's tail.
These guys just love looking at guys whose skin is the texture of a Lay's chip and being like, oh, this guy's preserving his strength.
It's like the
Explode.
closer you look to death, the more they're like, oh, he's hiding just an avalanche, a volcano of power within that frame.
He began to advance an argument in what sounded like a parody of the high style in British politics, theatrical, dramatic, self-serious, when, a few seconds in, he appeared to completely forget what he was about to say. He looked up, startled, "Where am I?" and asked the packed chamber which side he was supposed to be on. "What's the motion anyway?" Before anyone could answer, a light bulb appeared over his head, and he was off, this time in an even more orotund, florid manner. Yet, within a few seconds, he'd wrong-footed himself again, this time because it had suddenly occurred to him that there was an equally compelling argument for the opposite point of view. This endless flipping and flopping, in which he seemed to constantly surprise himself, went on for the next 15 minutes. The impression he gave was of someone who'd been plucked from his bed in the middle of the night and then plonked down in the dispatch box of the Oxford Union without the faintest idea of what he was supposed to be talking about. This is what Nietzsche talked about, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
This is actually like the delirium of an advanced state of diaper rash. People don't know it can get that bad.
This is like if you saw just like any foul son wake up at 5 p.m. and wander down to family dinner and be like, did I miss breakfast? You'd be like, oh my God.
No, this
is the next stage in evolution. Like Toby Young would be similarly enamored by AJ Soprano.
no, I mean what he's describing, that is very Nietzschean. It like when Nietzsche's brain was dissolved by syphilis and he was trying to fuck
When
horses.
he was talking to a horse.
Yeah.
So
he got curved by a horse. Really sad.
I mean, this does go on for about 10,000 words. But there's one last thing here. He says, to say I was impressed would be an understatement. So he just described about how he like just doddered on, not knowing where he was or what he was talking about, and then like argued against his own point to like the jeers of an entire room. And then Toby Young was like, "This man will be prime minister." And you know what? In the UK, that's probably a good fucking bet.
Because he's dummy thick. At the end of the day, that's what matters.
The odds are if you're listening to this show, you are also like a confused husky boy. You have a bright future in the UK. The world is your oyster.
There's just a bunch of fail lords going to the East Coast to rebuild the Mayflower to go back to the United Kingdom.
That's why webmaster guys like adopt British slang.
Yeah.
Like gobshite. Because like over there they would be stop going to Japan to teach English. They're sick of you. They've seen a ton of schlubby Americans. It's not impressive anymore.
That's the people that has their shit together too.
Yeah.
You need to go to a place where they have no standards.
Yeah, if you're a fucking nerd, like go to the UK. Like you're probably over 5'10". You're towering over these people. Just go over there and teach, I don't know, fucking Java or whatever. I don't know. You will be a god there. You will be elected. You'll be given a life peerage.
So he goes here, a few years before arriving at Oxford, I had watched the television adaptation of Brideshead Revisited, Evelyn Waugh's Oxford novel. You notice he said he didn't read the book.
Yeah, fuck that shit.
And had been expecting to meet the modern-day equivalents of Sebastian Flyte and Anthony Blanche, larger-than-life, devil-may-care aristocrats delivering bon mots in between sips of champagne and spoonfuls of caviar. But the reality was very different. Warm beer, stale sandwiches, and secondhand opinions. Lots of spotty students, all as gauche as me. Less like an Oscar Wilde play than a Mike Leigh film. He's comparing it to a Mike Leigh film because of all the rapes that happened, by the way. So there you go. That's Toby Young's Flights of Fancy.
He's convinced me.
Now.
The doddering oaf is, he's going to definitely pull off that whole hard Brexit thing. Way to go, buddy.
Well,
It's going to be great.
what's going to happen is they're going to have a bad deal on the table, and because he thinks like he's settling a lawsuit with Tesco or a defamation lawsuit with Tesco, he'll sign it, and then like his cufflink will latch on to the desk and slowly unravel until he's completely naked by EU bylaws, invalidating the deal. Saving.
Yeah, that's the Mr. Bean loophole.
Yeah.
So there you go. Now British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, full of coiled strength and potency, even as a young lad.
Ugh.
The future's looking bright, folks. And that's not just the sun flashing off of his pale fucking skin.
The only
No, it's the artificial moon that's been created.
There are only a few people who could stand up to Boris Johnson's just, looming strength and imposing Superman physique and charisma. Vito Spatafor's goth son is one. Fred Flintstone, Peter Griffin.
Oh my God! What if that guy who cosplays as Peter Griffith went to England? They would make him king. They would just overthrow the Windsors and make him king.
That guy's like against racism, so that's a huge. He did a PSA against racism, so like that's a
gonna be a
huge
strike.
liability for him.
Yeah.
Didn't that guy have a falling out with the real life Lois Griffin?
The real
though?
life Lois Griffin,
Oh.
who fucking, by the way, has her resemblance to Lois is nothing like his resemblance.
No,
to
that
Peter.
guy is unfucking
That
candy.
guy rules. She stole his YouTube channel. It's such fucking bullshit.
I
I
gotta
don't
see
know
this.
anything about this drama.
There's a guy named Real Life Peter Griffin who looks and sounds exactly like Peter Griffin, and he rocks. He's a good-natured fellow.
Okay.
But he was exploited by his sort of cosplay real life Lois Griffin wife who took over his YouTube page after they had
Yeah.
a falling out.
Yeah,
She looks
Doesn't look
nothing like
anything like
Lois.
him.
This is
What
so
the fuck is
fucking
this?
dude. It gets me so
This
fucking
is
mad.
bullshit.
Horrifying.
She looks nothing. It's such bullshit.
Is anyone doing anything about this?
President Trump.
President Trump, sir, we are honored to fight on your side of this war against this
Fake Lois
fraudulent Lois Griffiths. How am I supposed to beat off to this?
Real life Lois Griffin couldn't even play Meg. It's really pathetic. It's terrible to see. Real life Peter Griffin is everyone loves him. He's so big.
Oh my God! Yeah, he loves big guys. He goes
Yeah, he's
crazy for him.
giant. Real life Peter Griffin's a fucking tank.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we should wrap it up for this today.
We should put a link to real life Peter Griffin
Yeah.
on this so people know what the fuck we're talking about.
Just go into the description.
No context for any of the Glenn interview or British politics, but give them a link to real life Peter Griffin so they have some context for this discussion.
That's the important stuff.
We're all about education on
Yeah.
this show. All right,
We do have a few plugs.
plug away.
All right.
Okay, coming up this upcoming week, Traverse City, Michigan, we will be doing a live
couple
little
of things.
what?
It'll be a couple of events.
We'll be
Me,
doing
you, and Brendan actually.
the trader Brendan James.
The trader Brendan.
rears his head
I
again.
hope this is a Diet Worms type setup for him.
Yes. He will
On
be-
I believe July 30th for the second Democratic debates, we'll be on stage live. Doing some goofs. That one is free, and then later that week on Friday, we are doing a live show. So come out for those. Ticket links are in the description. And then next month, on a day that I remember, in
23rd of August.
23rd of August in Providence, Rhode Island at Necronomicon, we will be doing live Call of Cthulhu.
And if you like reading, which you probably don't because you're listening to this, I recently am published again in Columbia Journalism Review, interviewing editor of Financial Times Lionel Barber.
Till next time, guys.
Bye-bye.
Next time.
Cheers.
Bye.
Hi guys, real life Peter Griffin here. You know what really grinds my gears? Racism. I mean, the only things that I am intolerant of are giant chickens and Meg. I think there's two things that we can all agree on. Number one, we all need oxygen to breathe. And number two, 90% of Sean Paul's lyrics are indecipherable. And girl, I wanna be the papa, you can be the mom, oh. Because the girl them broke out on the floor from you don't wanna work this performer. What? And under no circumstances should you ever say any words like